Well, let's see what type of delusions we can find today. Oh, whoopsie. Here's one we can find where a black guy is trying to explain you that the blacks need to claim other than Egypt and Cleopatra, which you're probably aware of finally now, due to them coming out and blatantly trying to make Bantus somehow the Egyptians and Ptolemy and Cleopatra, which has been a complete flop, and not even allowed to be shown in Egypt, from my understanding. But people usually don't realize, they may have seen black people standing on a street corner wearing clown outfits saying that they're the original Hebrews and so on too. So that might be possible that you see that a small amount, but you wouldn't believe of how much of an egregious amount it is. When you see videos that say things like this and they get an incredible amount of views, so you can tell these people, once they hear one of these lies they like, they just subscribe to that one there and just get to keep hearing lies that they can go around and act cocky about and act upon. And we need to have an open discourse about this, because it's gotten way out of hand, and it insults every single person that they try to claim that they used to be. Racistly and every other bad connotation that we currently have nowadays that you try to put on it with this whitewashing idea, but it becomes blackwashing with all these different shows. But let's get into this current delusion here, because it's a little special.
This one of our sisters right here. I love this sister, Jane Elliot. She always speaking that real. We're
gonna let her go right now. He says, I don't know whether I should do it before or after. Let's try before, because Jane Elliot has her own little wiki page here telling about what she did in life and what she's known for. Let's move this over so it's still big enough where we can all see. So Nee Jennison, which has been renamed Jane Elliot, was born on November 30th, 1933, an American diversity educator. So you can probably see with that one sentence why they've latched onto her, but there are much more things. She's a school teacher. She became known for her blue eyes, brown eyes exercise, which she first conducted with her third grade class on April 5th, 1968, the day after the assassination of Martin Luther King. The publication of compositions which the children had written about the experience in the local paper led to a much broader media interest into it. And of course, the pandering started coming from that point there and went on worse. I don't want to read this whole thing onto you, but she was born in a little town in Riceville, Iowa, and she's was an Irish American and fourth of several children. In fact, it looks like they don't even know how many children they had, because that's the only answer I got in two different places was several, fourth of several. But anyhow, she began teaching a career in a one-room schoolhouse in Randall. And then after the assassination of Martin Luther King, she snapped here a little bit and says she vividly remembers a scene which a right reporter pointed his microphone towards a local black leader and asked things like, when our leader, JFK, was killed several years ago, his widow held us all together. Who's going to control your people? And they put your in italics, so you're supposed to go, who's going to control your people? You know, this is one of those you people kind of things, like who are they talking about? And so you can get all this pandering and things. And so she thought that she would try on her class of third graders, an experiment on them that no one's parents agreed upon or anything like that, but the children agreed on courses of how it would feel to see it the other way. And at first, there was a resistance among the students and the minority group to the idea of brown-eyed children were better than blue-eyed children. To counter this, Elliot lied to the children, and see if you've ever heard this statement, that melanin was linked to their higher intelligence and learning ability, and shortly thereafter this initial resistance fell away, and those who were deemed superior became arrogant, bossy, and otherwise unpleasant to their other blue-eyed inferior classmates. Their grades on simple tests were better, and they completed mathematical and reading tests that seemed to be outside their ability scores before, by just propping up and lying to them. And this gave people an idea that we're currently under now, where they felt like it's okay if, as long as black people will make some advances, we'll let them just go out of hand. But it seems like it's gotten out of hand here pretty bad, because they're starting to claim everyone but themselves, and also try to compare themselves constantly to the Caucasian heralds of mankind, the spacemen. So it's kind of like recent primitives versus spacemen, but in their mind they've always been told that we're all equal and all of this type of stuff. So it's giving them an inferiority complex mixed with a cargo cult mentality, and it causes a problem. They'll go on here and they tell you that after they did this to the kids, everybody was pissed off, and the parents and so on. Media tried to get onto her, because maybe you could try this with high school students, and if you ask their parents too, but you sure wouldn't take some third grade kids and do some torturing thing like this that would end up causing problems, perhaps, well, for them for the rest of their lives on both sides of the eye color fence. But then also, it could also breed something that you didn't want to even try to come from it, where now you've said some lies to black people and they keep repeating them, because there was this lady one time that said this thing, which it even says in the article, well, she lied to them and told them this thing about melanin. By the way, this is reversey game, in the bizarro world idea where everything's backwards. And what people have noted before this time, which now looking back at it, everybody tries to say, oh, they were racist because they were showing that white people were more advanced than other people, and that all dark-skinned people around the planet were less advanced than even their contemporaries where they were near them. And it almost seemed to go in a caste type system that was easily noted in India and things like that we'll get into in other videos. But lo and behold, it's the backwards thing, where instead of melanin's holding you back, which it's not about skin color, it has to do with heritages and things like that. It really does make a difference. But if you want to, you can read this whole thing where she went on Johnny Carson and Channel 4 and all these different places, and Oprah Winfrey show 5 times, and oh, they like her. They like her. She keeps pumping things out. Well, what has she decided now that she would do after she was ridiculed? And a lot of people say, third graders and whatever, what are you trying to do? Well, what she decided that she would do was she would start telling African Americans that they used to be the ancient Indians and came here before them, because she heard a few of them saying it, and it was real important to them. So she thought, well, let's try an experiment. And so you're seeing this black guy try to claim desperately that that's what's going on, and that's the way things went because of what she said, and he's going to show it out to you because he's
this one of our sisters right here. I love this sister, Jane Elliot. She always speaking that real. We're going to let her go in right now, then we're going to get right back to it. Let's go.
We should be studying black people from 10,000 years ago. But teachers will say, well, that's prehistorical. That is the truth. We need to teach the truth. The first black people who came here were not brought here as slaves. They came here as discoverers and explorers between 20,000 and 10,000 years before Columbus was born.
You see that? We was here before slavery, bro.
So you see him rubbing his hands and just loving this idea of this cargo cult mentality. Let's go back to Wiki if we can and see if we can get any rationale on this. So she claims that they ought to start studying black people from 10,000 years ago. If she tried to do anything of the sort, she would run into a wall at an article about Asillar Man. Now, if we want to look at them in the last 10,000 years, or 10 to 20 as she's talked about, we'll have to look at this. It'll become something that comes directly up in your face, that there's Asillar Man. And Asillar specimen has been dated to around 6400 BP, which is before present. Take 2000 off of that, and that's BC, 4400 BC, making it no older than the Holocene. Well, the Holocene is the last ice age, and it started 11,700 years ago, right? So if it's only 4400 BC versus 11,700, there's a large difference between that. But Asillar specimen is dated only 4400 BC. But what's important about it? Well, they mention, along with such fossils as Iwaliru at 11,000 years before present, and Ishango, 8,000 years before present, which were excavated from archaeological sites in West and Central Africa, Asillar is one of the earliest known modern human skeletons with a Negroid phenotype, living in sub-Saharan Africa. Older fossils with similar morphology have been found near Khartoum, dating between 8,000 and 500 and 5,000 BC. So it got even changed, and one advocate for Afrocentrism, Cheek Anti-Diop, was one of the people that got into it and redated it 6390, just to be exactly sure. So now they even lose some more time off of that. But he was in the sub-Saharan region of Mali. And so what was there at the time? Well, if we were to take a look at what we see as Iwaliru here, other ones that are before this time, it's a still extant hominid. I know you're led to believe in school off this little fairy tale idea of how this evolutionary went, and they show you a chart on it. But whenever they do, some of those people aren't even actively in the chart, and depending on which one, it might even have Nebraska Man that was blown out of the water in the 50s and so on, because they claimed that there was already people in America, and then they tried to reclaim it and say that's just a pig's tooth or something in the pig family. So, description of this guy. The cranial vault is relatively long and low, and the frontal lobe shows moderate recession. The brow ridges are moderately developed for a male, and there's no pronounced nasal root. What remains of the nasal area suggests that the nasal bridge was relatively flat, and the evidence for x-rays point to little frontal sinus development. It also shows an exorbitant amount of prognathism, which is where you have a more simian or ape-like appearance to the bottom half of your face, where it protrudes out more. And they've realized that agriculture seems to help impinge upon that. But then again, Cro-Magnon Man is the first person on the planet to have a chin and actually have pulled that in, which makes you think different about when agricultural type things went on. I have a new video coming out soon along with Robert Sepper. It shows some of his work again, where recent archaeologists have all gotten together and due to genetics that they know of now and all the variations, which this is just one loose area over here where West Sub-Saharan Africa, there were no humans. There was only hominids, small brained, football headed, about 4 foot tall hominids at the time. And then apparently they've got intergressed by somebody who, whenever you look at genetics, find out, well, it's somebody with E1B1 genetics that had hybrided with these people here. And in that it gave them a larger cranial capacity than they had before. And so we can look at these cranium here, well, not really, because I can't pull it up or down off of it, but they're a still Homo erectus style of species, and that form, and not a modern type of form preemptive to that, such as Iwalir, where they're talking about. So it even mentions Chris Stringer in here, and I don't want to go into it at this point and show you, but in one of my other videos, where you could probably find it under Chris Stringer, he actually goes into the fact that they found these skulls that are still there, and it was along with a myriad of different archaeological finds that showed you that, well, you know, kind of how you think it goes on that linear line up through. Well, Homo erectus supposedly died off hundreds of thousands of years ago, but that's not actually true. What's actually true is that some of them lived on like a land of the lost in certain areas of the world. And one that's a key point that he could point out is West Sub-Saharan Africa. And then all of a sudden they changed radically, and they were like, well, how could this happen? It doesn't really happen anywhere where anybody pops like popcorn, this extreme cranial vault elongation getting much bigger, still about 12-13% smaller than other humans on the planet, but that can be expected due to a hybridization. And genetics steps up to the plate and says, well, E and all of its subroots and the things that came before that developed and led to E all come from these Caucasians and Eurasians and backflow and things like that, but also the ancient Berbers that used to live in North Africa, where North Africa was always Caucasians. And this looks like the source. And it makes good sense because they're just right there. They just have to go down into the Congo jungle and it would be there. And during a time of the Green Sahara and all of that, there wouldn't have been, well, a small edge of the Sahara Desert blocking him by that's 450 miles long. It would have been much smaller and not too far out of a range of thought. So now we have the idea of what would happen if we started studying black people, like she mentioned, from 10,000 years ago or any time even more. And we're going to go through this one more time and watch it, but look how happy he is to try to pretend and just push the Amerindians aside. I don't know when they're going to get tired of it.
This one of my sisters right here, I love this sister, Jane Elliot. She always speaking that real. We're going to let her go in right now, then we're going to get right back to it. Let's go.
Well, we just found out on the article on her that she's always speaking that lies as an experiment. But he claims that's real because of what she lies and says as an experiment.
We should be studying black people from 10,000 years ago. But teachers will say, well, that's prehistorical. That is the truth. We need to teach the truth. The first black people who came here were not brought here as slaves. They came here as discoverers and explorers between 20,000 and 10,000 years before Columbus was born.
Let me express to you the concept that Homo erectus and all of its forms that have been known around the planet doesn't even control fire, much less have actually built any way a boat or done anything like that. And therefore, if we do want to look into it like we just did with me, in order to just see two instances, what are the two instances? Well, we looked at what this lady is and does and is about. Oops, failure. And then we looked at the reality of what would happen if you were looking at a Negroid type from 10,000 years ago. If we decide to go to 20, it appears they don't even exist. No older than the Holocene. So they couldn't have been involved with any part of it. And of course, that Homo erectus species couldn't have been related to anybody. They found recently, too, another showing which also shows you the lie that's been tried to project it out of Africa and all these other situations, where they find an up to 19% unknown ghost hominid in blacks that's just like a Neanderthal or a Denisovan, but instead of being Homo sapiens type or something close to this. They call it an unknown hominid because it's not found in the records, and it has to be that. And most of them, by looking at the archaeological record where we're looking at here, they go, oh, well, it must be themselves from before the admixing event at 4400 BC. But he doesn't like that idea. He likes the "we were Amerindians," which insults every Amerindian. And I don't know if you think they've had enough BS, but how about this one?
You see that? We was here before slavery, bro.
Let me know what you think down below about this situation. Peace.